Hey everyone, I'm Mark, and today we're going to look at a few things that I wish I knew before I bought my WinCtrl CDU, which is officially referred to as either the PFP or MCDU, depending on which model you get. WinCtrl are the company you already probably know as WinWing, and they went through a rebrand just before the holidays in 2025, but the product lineup has stayed pretty much the same. Picking the right CDU for you, first and foremost, comes down to deciding which plane you want it for the most, since by default they are only compatible with a single airplane type. If you're mostly an Airbus flyer, the choice is going to be fairly simple, since the MCDU is compatible with the whole Phoenix lineup and the fly-by-wire A320, along with a few other planes as well. Things are a bit more complicated on the Boeing side though, because there are different FMC models depending on the 737 that you prefer, on top of the 777 and the 747 variants also being slightly different as well. The PFP-3N is an exact match for the layout of the PMDG 737NG series, which, as I learned while doing the research for this video, is actually an older version of the Boeing FMC. The PFP-3N is also compatible with the iFly 737 MAX, but the downside is that it won't match the button layout of the FMC that you get in the MAX because it has a more recent version of the Boeing FMC. The iFly's FMC is much closer to the layout of the PFP-4 or PFP-7, which by default are not compatible with the iFly. However, you can make it work with third-party software like MobiFlight, which we'll talk about in just a bit. The PFP-7 is geared for the 777, so specifically all of the PMDG variants of it, and the PFP-4, on the other hand, is aimed at the 747, which for now means the default 747, but I imagine once the PMDG 747 comes out that it'll be updated to work with it as well. Finding a compatibility list for each of these devices isn't as easy as it should be on the WinCtrl website, but for each product's page, if you scroll down about 3/4 of the way down the page, there will be a click for details button to show you the full list of planes it's compatible with. The reason each model is bound to a specific type, at least if you ask me, is because they want you to buy each model for each specific airplane type. But I'll be honest here, I just don't see myself buying a second FMC for another type. What I'd recommend is if you only fly and only ever plan to fly the PMDG 737NG series, it makes sense to buy the PFP-3N since it's an exact match for it. But if you fly multiple types, I would look at the PFP-7 instead, which is what I ended up buying. The button layout of the PFP-7 is a perfect match for the 777, and it's also very close to the 747 layout and the iFly 737's layout as well. And with software like MobiFlight or SpatNext, you can enable it to work with any of those types without buying a second device. Before we look at third-party software though, let's quickly talk about the default software for it, which is called SimAppPro, and it's available on WinCtrl's website. Right off the bat, trying to install it immediately brings up some warnings from Windows, which I believe is because the application isn't digitally signed. To be clear, SimAppPro is perfectly safe to use, but I really wish they would fix this because it doesn't have a very professional feel to it when Windows tries to block your software. It also asks you for admin privileges every time you start the application, which shouldn't be necessary for a peripheral like this, and it again just adds to the feeling that the software isn't polished at all. The UI's look and feel is very basic, and it can at times be confusing to use due to some poor translations, and considering all of the tools that we have available to us to build modern applications today, I hope that most of these things will get improved in a future version. You'll probably have to do a firmware update to bring your device up to spec, but from there I didn't have any issues making SimAppPro talk to the device itself, and it works flawlessly once you start the right plane for it in Flight Sim. Because of all of the reasons I just mentioned though, other than for firmware updates, I don't actually use SimAppPro at all because the alternatives are simpler, better, and more extensible to other aircraft types. That's where tools like MobiFlight come into play, since they allow you to customize and extend the operation of whichever device you end up buying. I used a PFP 7 with the 777, obviously, but with pre-built MobiFlight profiles, I was able to get it working on the 737, the default 747, and even some business jets like the CJ4 with a little bit of additional tooling. You don't need to be a computer expert to get MobiFlight running either. It's only a couple of installers to run with some pretty clear instructions on how to set it all up. From there, it's just a matter of downloading a profile for the aircraft that you want from flightsim.to, and that's going to map the buttons to equivalent functions in the plane that you're flying. Getting the screen to actually replicate a display from the aircraft only works on supported planes, and it isn't a huge list so far, but there are also some standalone tools for certain aircraft that can enable this as well. Oftentimes that'll mean adding an extension to the community folder and running an executable on the side to populate the screen, but if you dig around online, you'll find tooling for almost every plane with a CDU. The physical device itself is a nice quality though, and it has a bunch of different ways that you can mount it with the screws that they provide, although again the instructions were a bit unclear and hard to understand. If you're installing it on a desk or coffee table like I did, it also comes with a backing plate to give it a bit of an angle so that it's a bit easier to look at and operate. It is a fairly light device, so you need to mount it one way or another to avoid it moving around on you, and there are screw holes both on the device itself and on the mounting plate that should work for most home cockpit solutions. It also comes with a bunch of double-sided stickers to secure it anywhere that you want, and that's what I've actually ended up using. The buttons themselves have a really nice tactile feel, and overall it looks and feels like a quality build to me. You can change the lighting of the screen itself exactly like the real thing to whatever you want depending on your lighting situation, and the text on the screen is very crisp as well. If you ever see it look blurry, it's just my capture of it that isn't great. All of the buttons are backlit, and all of the additional lights, like the one above the execute button or the ones on either side of the keys, also illuminate and work properly. In terms of actual usage, it probably takes you a flight or two to get used to physically looking down at the device rather than trying to look at it on screen like you're used to, but once you get the hang of it, it really feels great. It reproduces exactly what you see in the virtual cockpit on the screen of the device, and only in very rare situations have I run into a problem or a discrepancy with what's shown on screen. You obviously use it a lot during the pre-flight phases of a flight, and a fair bit as you set up for the approach too, and I find it really helps with your situational awareness overall. What I'll often do on a longer flight is bring the progress page up and then put myself on a nice view in the plane somewhere so that I can keep an eye on how we're progressing and enjoy the view at the same time. I would say if you regularly fly airliners, it's a real game changer in terms of immersion, especially if you have place for it. I wouldn't go as far as saying it's an absolute must-have if you're a casual airliner fan though, since you can just as well use a custom view that's focused on the CDU instead whenever you need it. If you learned something useful today about these devices, make sure to like the video and subscribe to get more similar content like this one.